Hi everyone, we're Group 62 and we'll be talking about the growing diversity of EV adoption in Washington. And here is our team members. Transportation is the largest single source of carbon in the United States. Here in Washington, electric cars registrations jumped 43% in 2023, climbing from about 118,000 to almost 169,000. That surge, plus the state's clean hydropower, makes Washington a perfect place to study the EV shifts. Today, we'll show how EV numbers has grown and how the mix of models has widened. First, let's look at the line chart titled Historical Carbon Dioxide Emission from Transportation. From the early 1990s to 2019, the blue curve rises almost every year. Two small dips stand out: 2009 during the recession and 2020 when COVID kept us home. But each drop is brief. The quick rebound proves that short pauses cannot solve long-term climate problem. Now, turn to the stack bar that compare different vehicle types. A gasoline car releases the most carbon. Hybrids do a bit better, and fully electric cars make the biggest cut. Even after we count the yellow size, a 200 miles EV emits less than half the carbon of a gas car, and the 400 miles EV still beats a hybrid by a wide margin. These two visuals set the stage for the rest of our talk, where we dive into local growth patterns, brand variety, and the impact these trends could have on Washington's climate goals.
All right. Moving into part two, we look at how EV adoption has grown over time across Washington state. This first graph shows EV registrations in Washington from 2010 to 2024. From 2010 to 2015, growth was slow, fewer than 6,000 new EVs per year. This was mainly due to limited infrastructure and low awareness. Then in 2015, the state introduced the CAFV initiative, where we started seeing a steady increase. By 2019, state rebates expanded, and then in 2021, the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed. This combo caused a huge jump of over 70% between 2020 and 2021. The biggest leap, though, happened between 2022 and 2023 as the state passed a gas car sales ban. This led to fuel prices being increased and more charging stations were added, all of which pushed registrations past 72,000. So instead of just looking at total EV numbers, this heat map shows EVs per 100,000 people in each county, which gives us a more balanced view by accounting for population differences. Counties like King, San Juan, Snohomish, and Jefferson stand out there. These are real EV hotspots when you look at EV ownership rates and not just raw totals. The next chart here breaks down the most popular EV brands in Washington. Tesla is far ahead of the pack with over 128,000 registrations. That's more than 5 times the next brand, Nissan, which comes in around 26,000. Chevrolet, Ford, and Kia follow, showing a clear second tier of adoption. What's interesting is the breadth of brands here. Even companies like Rivian, Volkswagen, and Volvo are seeing traction, with signals that EV adoption isn't just limited to a single segment. It's spreading across both legacy automakers and new entrants. This diversity points to a growing consumer confidence and a maturing market. Here, we look at the types of EVs registered in Washington. As you would expect, passenger vehicles dominate, making up nearly the entire EV market with close to 295,000 vehicles. Other types like trucks, commercial vehicles, and exempt government EVs exist, but their numbers are relatively small. To simplify the view, we group the remaining minor categories such as neighborhood, electric vehicles, cabs, and farm use into an others category. This reinforces the idea that EV adoption is currently being led by individual consumers rather than commercial or fleet use, though that could shift as infrastructure and policy continue to evolve. Thank you.
Now, let's Let's take a look at the variety of EVs in terms of makes, models, and types, and let's see how popular they are in the state of Washington. So start with, we have two major types of EVs: battery-based EVs, also known as BEVs, and plug-in hybrids, aka PHEVs. And at the beginning of the last decades, the battery-based EVs started off very strongly and gained almost all the market shares. However, as the time moved on, plug-in hybrids picked up their game rapidly and reached its peak in 2012 with a market share of 36.04%. But after that, battery based EVs fought off the rise of the plug-in hybrids and gradually and continuously gaining more momentum and shaved off some of the market shares that plug-in hybrids have gained in the first 2 years of the last decade. This is the same story. Most of the populated counties echo the same phenomena as the overall states of Washington. And let's look at the King, Snohomish, and Clark, Pierce counties. They display a very similar patterns as the entire state. However, it's a totally different stories in the rural areas. In these less populated counties, due to like some of the fundamental differences in their infrastructures. Let's look at the counties of Yakima and Stevens, because due to a lack of infrastructure and the fact that rural people are more reluctant to adapt to EVs. At the beginning of the last decades, we can see that most of the EVs in the market in these counties are plug-in hybrids, and as opposed to battery EVs in the more populated counties. However, with the time goes on, with more infrastructure constructed and more incentives from the government, BEVs has gained momentum and got the majority of the markets as of now. And this is a graph showing like how more popular BEV is compared to plug-in hybrids. And the darker the blue, the more popular BEV is in a county. And we can see that in most populated counties, this is the case, more of the case compared to the rural ones. And with a little bit look at what kind of makes and models will stand out in the development of the EV markets in the state of Washington, and Tesla definitely grabbed our attentions because we saw like a huge spike in the growth of Tesla in 2018 with the launch of Model 3 and later on the launch of Model Y. We can see in this graph that the green line indicates the percentage share of that Tesla has when it comes to total registrations, and there's a drastic uptick in 2017 and stayed high consistently after that. And the area chart below show that Tesla has been having more than 50% of the market share consistently after that 2018. And when it comes to these two models, we can see more clearly in this area chart that after the launch of Model Y and Model 3 in 2018, they've got a lot of market shares, and they've basically almost half of the market after 2018. And when it comes to why they're so much more popular, from our data set, we can give one of the reasons, which is the electric range. Electric range is one of the most important factors people consider when purchasing a vehicle, electric vehicle, and Tesla Model 3 and Model Y are definitely in the upper echelon of the whole spectrum, and this is one of the reasons why they are so much more popular. And with that said, let's pass this on to my group members for the next topic.
So as we just saw, there's an incredible variety of EV makes and models on the road today, which tells us that the EV market is expanding in terms of consumer choice. But that doesn't necessarily mean access is equal across the board. In this next section, we'll explore how income and other demographics are shaping the EV landscape. When we look at where EV adoption is strongest, a clear pattern starts to emerge. Many of the counties with the highest number of EVs per 100,000 residents also experience some of the largest income growth since 2010. Of the top 4 counties in EV adoption, those being King, San Juan, Snohomish, and Jefferson, 3 rank in the top 10 for income growth across all 37 counties in Washington. And that matters because rising income often goes hand in hand with greater EV readiness, such as more investment in charging infrastructure, higher rates of home ownership, and a greater openness to long-term tech-forward purchases. That combination helps explain why we're seeing not just more EVs, but a greater variety. So we've seen that rising income levels help create the conditions for EV adoption, but what does that actually look like across the state? This scatter plot brings that pattern into focus. Each point represents a Washington county, and the trend is unmistakable. Counties with both high median incomes and high EV adoption stand out in the upper right quadrant. King, Snohomish, San Juan, and Jefferson, already highlighted for their strong EV presence, are all located here. This reinforces that EVs tend to cluster in more affluent areas where residents are better positioned to invest in long-term purchases. So those top counties not only saw higher incomes, but they were also putting that money toward EVs at exactly the right time. EV prices were starting to fall, and since 2010, the median base MSRP for electric vehicles has dropped by about 37%, making them far more accessible than they were a decade ago. And that price shift wasn't just market driven, it was policy driven. In 2016, Washington passed a policy that expanded the state's EV sales exemption, raised the qualifying MSRP cap from $35,000 to $42,500, and extended rebates to plug-in hybrids as well. That meant buyers could now afford mid-market models that were previously out of reach and was a key step in making the EV landscape more varied. In 2024, the median MSRP ticked up because macro factors like tariffs and policy changes squeezed prices upward. So, income and pricing played a major role in opening up the EV market. But what about age? When we map out counties by their median age and EV adoption rates, we find something surprising. There's no clear age barrier. Of the counties with the highest number of EVs per 100,000 residents, some fall near the state's median age, while others skew significantly older. This suggests that EV adoption isn't confined to any one age group, it's happening in communities with both younger and older populations. With all this in mind, let's take a look at what this means for the future.
Thanks so much for talking, Nicole. Let's begin with the environmental impacts of EV growth in Washington state area. Over the past decade, Washington has experienced a remarkable increase in electricity vehicle adoption. As the chart shows, the EV registration have grown from just a few hundred in 2010 to over 70,000 in 2024. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, each EV on the road can save around 4.6 tons of carbon dioxide emission every year. By 2024, this translated into an estimated 332,888 tons of carbon dioxide reduced statewide, a significant contribution to Washington climate goals. This data clearly highlight how EV adoption isn't just about new technology, it is also about a cleaner air, healthier communities, and a stronger environment future for the state. So moving on to the technology progress, let's look at the types of EVs and their driving ranges. In 2025, the battery electricity vehicle made up nearly 79% of all EV in Washington, while the plug-in hybrid electricity vehicle accounted for just over 21%. This shift towards the battery electricity vehicle shows a strong consumer preference for full electricity solution. On average, the pure electricity vehicle in Washington can travel 57 miles on the electricity alone compared to just 32 miles for the hybrid ones. That's nearly twice the range, demonstrating the major improvements in battery performance, energy efficiency, and charging infrastructure. These gains reflect not just evolving technology, but also growing the confidence among the driver in particularly of electrical vehicles for everyday use. And despite there are so many strong support and benefits, several barriers remain still. The first one would be the rural suburban areas lack fast chargers, and the home charging is limited in multiple unit buildings. And the third factor would be upfront costs are still high for many buyers, and the incentives remains inconsistent, adding uncertainties. So addressing these gaps is essential to expanding EV access statewide. So looking ahead, the Washington aims for 100% electricity new vehicle sales by 2035. The state is expanding public and private charging, especially in underserved region. So the EV growth also means the new job in batteries, infrastructure, and the energy grid. But success depends on policy sustainability, affordability, and grid readiness. Unlimitedly, EVs represent more than a vehicle shift. They're part of a cleaner, smarter future. And this is a reference that we used in this project. Our research was supported by many public data sets from data.government.com, and these sources provide the crucial insight into EV adoption, demographic, and the policy impact in Washington state area. That's the presentation we're giving for the final project. Thanks.